When we last talked, making our way through this key concept 2.1 about the codification of religions and then new religions emerging, we talked about the old religions already, Judaism and Hinduism, as religions that became codified in their scriptures and obviously would unite populations. For the Jews, they would be populations after the diaspora that could spread out around the known world at the time, right? From their homeland in Judea into other reaches of the Middle East, into Central Asia, into Europe. The Jews can spread through all those places. And with regard to Hinduism, with their unified scriptures and unified spiritual ideas, it will bring some commonalities, cultural commonalities especially, to the South Asian peninsula. Today, we're going to move on and talk about some new belief systems that are going to be developing during this classical era. And some of them with connections to these older religions, and then some ideas new in their own right. Note, the heading for this concept is New Belief Systems Emerging and Spreading. We use the word belief systems rather than religions at this point because we're going to talk about a belief system, for example, in China called Confucianism. And Confucius, in his beginnings, we'll talk about him in a few minutes, he didn't purport to be a god, he didn't purport to be a prophet, he was just a guy that had some better ideas about how the state can be run. So over time, over many centuries and even millennia, this becomes a belief system that really forms the basis of the Chinese state. But not really a religion, at least in its beginning. So I guess the best way to phrase it, are you talking about a religion or a belief system? I would say that all religions are belief systems, but not all belief systems are necessarily religions. I'm sure there's a name for that idea in statistics, but I don't know it. Yes?
So how do people find out that you think we're going to make
Yeah. Followers follow him and then spread the ideas. And if there's good, how did you find out that I don't know, who do you think of as a great American that made some great decisions for our country? You had APUSH last year. Name one great American that you've ever heard of. How do we know that George Washington was really a great American and he had great ideas and he was a great military leader and a great first president and left his great farewell address that said to stay out of foreign entanglements and such? How do we know that? Because he wrote stuff down, he had followers that supported him, and people have continued to teach and talk about him forevermore, right? I'm going to assume that once I'm gone from this world, all that will live on is the Dobecast on YouTube. And it may or may not get any views at that point. So my great ideas, if there are any, will just be lost to the pages of history, right? But truly great people, and maybe you'll be one of them, they're remembered, right? Because they said things in such a way that got people to keep talking about them. Anyway, we're going to start with the first of these new faiths. We're going to talk about Buddhism. 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 Buddhism has begun in the Ganges River Valley. I don't have a big map in this class for us, so take a look here. There's the Arabian Peninsula and a Persian Gulf, and then there's India, and there's China, Southeast Asia, blah, blah, blah. That's Vietnam over there. So that's kind of a mess, right? But this works for us. Arabian Peninsula, Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, right? The Bay of Bengal. So this is India. For AP World purposes, we don't really call that part of the world India, because today it encompasses more countries than just India. So what does AP World call it?
South Asia.
We call this South Asia. So roughly all of this is South Asia. So if you get an AP exam question that's asking you about South Asia, you are thinking India, but you might not say India, you'll say South Asia. Today, what countries fit into South Asia? Yes? India, the big one of them all. Yes, ma'am. Bangladesh. A small country right up in this corner, Bangladesh. I'm just going to put a B there. What else we got? Yes, ma'am. Nepal, very good, up here. Mountainous region. Yes. What else we got? Pakistan, very good. That's up here. Pakistan. And then maybe one more that gets fit into South Asia typically. Yes?
I'm going to guess in Sri Lanka.
Oh, yeah, good. I forgot about Sri Lanka. A little island off the southeast coast of India. What else we got? Do you know the former name of Sri Lanka, or the name Sri Lanka was formerly referred to by Europeans? Ceylon. Ceylon. Yeah. We'll talk about that later in the year. One more country that sometimes fits here or sometimes gets put in Central Asia is Afghanistan. So that is South Asia for us, all right? And a couple notes in South Asia. Obviously, it's a massive hunk of land, this Indian peninsula. We also call it the Indian subcontinent. It's not a continent on its own, but it's still a massive tract of land and something that obviously we deal with it on its own right. There's many important rivers in South Asia, but there's two that are bigger than the rest. Yes, ma'am? We've got the Indus, which is over largely on the eastern side, and then we've got the Ganges River, which is largely on the western side. Very good. So out of that game, so please just have a rough idea of where these places are and what these two major rivers are. This guy, Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha, lived within the Ganges River Valley in India in the 6th century BCE. Someone give me 1 year within the 6th century BCE. Yes, Cece?
527.
That is a perfect year to give me within the 6th century BCE. 527 works. 584 works. 633? No. That's in the 7th century BCE. Siddhartha Gautama was a real, live guy. All right? There is historical records that this person existed. We talked last week about the idea of Abraham. Abraham predates any other, we're going back 4,000 years, predates other what we call extra-biblical records that he was there. We don't have anything besides the Bible that speaks of Abraham or the Torah. For Siddhartha Gautama, it's a little more recent, right? Comparatively more recent. He was a guy. And he was a Hindu prince. He was from the upper crust of the Hindu caste society. And Siddhartha Gautama had some problems. He was not happy himself. Despite having all the riches that the world could give him, he didn't find joy himself. And he was also frustrated with what he saw when he looked around him, in the sense that the caste system created these divisions in society, where he saw many others who had far less than him and suffered seemingly far greater than him. And he didn't think that was right. And we've already talked about this caste structure being a pretty rigid structure in South Asia. You were stuck with where you were stuck at. So the story of the birth of Buddhism is Siddhartha Gautama going off into the woods and sitting under a tree, Bodhi tree in India, and he meditates day after day after day in contemplation and meditation, barely taking in food for sustenance and water for sustenance, to the point where he is a shadow of himself. He's emaciated. He's skin and bones. And he achieves what will become known in Buddhism as nirvana. Nirvana was a band that revolutionized rock music in the late 1980s and very early 90s, kind of took music away from the hairband rock of the 1980s to grunge rock in the 1990s. Nirvana. No! That's the band! Okay, so the Buddhist term nirvana is the achievement of enlightenment. The achievement of enlightenment. And we'll talk about what that is in a moment here. The achievement of enlightenment. The word Buddha, the name Buddha, is now going to be taken by Siddhartha Gautama. Buddha means the enlightened one. Now, it's not the only enlightened one. There could be other Buddhas out there. Others could achieve the same thing. Oh, there it is. Are you guys reading that? Do you guys read that?
No, we haven't, but I would love to bring it back.
Bring it back. All right. He achieved enlightenment. Anybody can achieve enlightenment. Anybody can do what Siddhartha Gautama did. A couple notes before we talk more about what Buddhism is. Do you guys notice his ears in these two drawings of Siddhartha Gautama and then the enlightened Buddha? Do you guys notice his ears? What do you notice about his ears? Yes?
He has huge earlobes?
Yes, huge earlobes. Where do you think those huge earlobes come from? Yes?
Maybe because he was rich than the heavy jewelry.
Very good. He was wealthy. He had a lot of jewelry all over them, necklaces and shiny earrings. I kind of picture those people that like put the little discs in their ears, and then they put the bigger ones and the bigger ones, and they stretch out their lobes, right? And when Siddhartha Gautama achieved enlightenment, he didn't need those earthly material items anymore. He cast them all aside. So if you ever see a statue of a Buddha, you will typically see him without adornments, without the earrings. One exception is the Chinese fat Buddha. If you guys have ever seen that at a Chinese restaurant, like a big round guy, very happy, and he's going to have he's still going to have the lobe ears, but he'll have all kinds of necklaces, because that in Chinese kind of symbolizes good fortunes and such, and it veers a bit away from the original Buddhism of Siddhartha Gautama. Anywho, he achieves nirvana. He achieves enlightenment. What does that mean? It means he's got to accept what he calls the Four Noble Truths. So to be a Buddhist, you accept the idea of the Four Noble Truths. For AP World, you do not need to memorize the Four Noble Truths. Just understand the gist of them. The Four Noble Truths are: suffering happens. And suffering happens because we can't always get what we want. We can't always get what we want. We can't always get what we want. But if you try sometimes, you might find. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I went down to the local drugstore, all right, to get my prescription filled. I'm kidding. That's still the song. I'm going to stop. Okay. Suffering happens all the time because you can't get what you want. And we've all been there, right? I have a perfectly good iPhone. It's an iPhone 7. It's got more memory than I could possibly handle. And then what did they tell me about last week? An iPhone 8 and an iPhone 10. Do you know why there's no iPhone 9? Because 7, 8, 9. Yeah, that's a good one, right? That's scary. 7 is not cool. All right, anyway. I don't need an iPhone 10, but I kind of want an iPhone 10. I'm not going to get one. I'm probably going to at some point get an iPhone 8, but then I'm still going to be like, ooh, wish I had a 10. That's really cool. And I'm going to be a little bummed out about it. And we probably all experience this in our lives where even though with all that we have, we might look at others that have more and be like, or we might look at even the things that we do have and not be satisfied with it, right? And that bums us out. Whether it's material things like the phones, or whether it's like food. It's not like, oh man, I'm totally full. But as I'm driving home and I drive past the smell that Burger King pumps out, and I'm like, ugh, that smells pretty good. I want some of that. I don't need it, but I might want it, right? But if I can't have it at that moment, I'm a little bummed out. Or maybe you guys are young and in high school, so I'm sure some of you might be like, hey, you, and they might be like, you. And that bums us out, right? Because we can't always get what we want, and when we can't get what we want, we suffer, and suffering happens, right? When we suffer, we feel bad. It bums us out. We all get that, right? If we can accept what we have, the way we live now, we can end suffering. Sweet. If I were to tell you how to end your suffering, would you be like, tell me more. I might be in with this. Sure. Well, how do you end suffering according to Siddhartha Gautama and the Buddhists? You follow the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths are essentially suffering is real, and you can end suffering, because we want stuff that you can't have, and you can end it by following this Eightfold Path. Again, I'm not going to have you memorize. You don't need to memorize. Just like we don't need to memorize the 10 Commandments to associate them with like Christianity or Judaism. We don't need to memorize the Eightfold Path. Just associate it with Buddhism. And the idea is, of the Eightfold Path, if you follow the ideas of right view, knowing the truth, right speech, speaking positively, don't speak ill towards anybody, right concentration, you meditate, all right? Right mindfulness, control your thoughts. If you can practice these ideas and actually achieve these ideas, like controlling your thoughts, that means not only I'm not going to get sad about not having that thing that I want, but don't even have that like tinge of, man, that stinks. You've got to get beyond all of that. And if you can do all of that, you might very well achieve enlightenment. you might escape this idea of the earth that we live in and have a union with a universal spirit beyond that's bigger than all of us. That sounds a little bit like Hinduism, right? Escaping this idea of life and death through reincarnation and eventually achieving moksha, like one with Brahman. Same idea in Buddhism. The goal is ultimately to escape this earthly realm of life and death and suffering to achieve nirvana, to achieve union and enlightenment with the universal spirit. That's Buddhism. Now, Buddhism, why is it important for like world history studies? Buddhism is born out of India. Buddhism is born out of Hinduism. Siddhartha Gautama was frustrated. Even though he was wealthy, he wasn't happy. And so he cast that aside. He was frustrated with the caste society that he was living in. He didn't think that was right. And so he adopts these new ideas. And he teaches these new ideas. What kind of people in India do you think would be most likely to follow his lead? Yes? Yeah, maybe the lowest people in India, the people that are occupying the lowest rungs of Indian society. Because it gives them a little bit more hope, right? I don't have to go through life after life after life. I can work to achieve enlightenment now. So it would be very appealing to many in India, especially the majority who might be might be on the lower castes within society. One Indian leader named Ashoka. We're going to talk about him. He is a member of the Mauryan dynasty, Mauryan, the Mauryan dynasty. We're going to talk about them next week, but I want you to hear him now. The Mauryan dynasty is just one of the dynastic rulers of the Indian state around the 300s and 200s BCE. Ashoka Maurya is going to adopt, he's a Hindu, but he's going to adopt Buddhism. He's going to convert to Buddhism. And this is a big idea, guys, right now. The idea that you could be Hindu, and then you can convert to some other faith. Like Buddhism, it will welcome anybody into that faith. Buddhism is the first of these, what we would call universal religions that we're going to talk about today and throughout this class. It's a religion that knows no ethnic or regional boundaries. You could be a Buddhist. 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 We could all be Buddhists if we wanted to. All right? By the same token, we could all be Christians. We could all be Muslim. Remember I talked last week about how it's a little harder to do the converting to Judaism. It hasn't happened as much over time. Buddhism, like Christianity and Islam, is open to all. It's considered a universal religion. Ashoka converts to Buddhism. After his conversion, he will start to spread the ideas of Buddhism around his empire in a series of stones and pillars that are constructed throughout India called the Rock and Pillar Edicts. These are the Edicts of Ashoka, the Rock and Pillar Edicts. They're simply carved into the stone, right? Well, why would a guy like Ashoka take a bunch of Buddhist ideas and writings and put them all around India? Yes?
That way he could sort of show the people a different religion to follow.
Show the people a different way. Why do you think Ashoka? There's two reasons. One might be benevolent. If something is benevolent, what is it? Yes? For the common good. One might be a little self-serving. Maybe. Depends on how you want to look at this. Why might Ashoka want to spread these religious ideas, these Buddhist religious ideas around India? Yes, ma'am?
To create unity between all
Sure. Maybe getting people to think in a new way to create some idea of unity, yeah.
This is going to sound a little bit harsh, but maybe so there's not an uprising against him.
Sure. So if we go back to that eightfold path, let's go back here really quick. If everybody were practicing ideas like right view, know the truth, free your mind of evil, say nothing that hurts others, work for the good of others. If a whole society started doing these things, resisting evil, respecting life, if a whole society started practicing these ideas, what might you start to see in that society? Maybe a little more peace and harmony, right? And you guys are probably a little bit, like when you think of Buddhism, you probably think of it as a very peaceful religion, right? This is being somewhat contradicted right now by the Buddhist government in the country of Myanmar. If you've been following the news in Myanmar about the genocide of the Rohingya people and the issues going on there. But, generally speaking, this might be a way to set up a society where people would be generally peaceful and harmonious, right? So Ashoka spreads these ideas. It's important to note, and this is what I think Aiden started, how is this idea going to spread when maybe others don't? Well, an important guy like Ashoka bought into it and started spreading the ideas, helping them along. He would also encourage missionaries. He would also encourage missionaries to leave India and to head out, both to the west and to the east. They were far more successful going to the east to spread Buddhist ideas to other lands. And from here, from India, Buddhism will spread into India and China and Southeast Asia. So Buddhism will see a lot of spreading because it has nothing to. These are not considered God's chosen people like the Jews that won't spread all that much. This is open to anybody who wants to accept Buddhism. Cool? Yes, ma'am.
Did the religion change as it went?
Beautiful. Did the religion change? You don't even need to know the answer to this, and you will know the answer to this. Do things change when they come in contact with other ideas? Absolutely. That overarching word through AP World, syncretism. Buddhism that moves to China will look a little different than Buddhism that moves to Southeast Asia. And just like today, there's a number of denominations of Christianity. There's a number of sects within Islam. Fewer separate sects, but two main sects within Islam, sects, S-E-C-T-S. Sects within Islam. Buddhism has variety as well as it's spread to different areas. Absolutely. Yes?
I'm still a bit confused about the two things that you were saying about. What were the two? You said something about Ashoka and like 2 reasons he's...
Okay. Yeah. So why would he want to spread? Maybe, if you're being benevolent, he literally thinks this is a better way of life. Like, he thinks this is the right way to live. I want to spread that idea. Or, maybe self-servingly, he thinks this is what will keep more safety and less conflict in the Indian society, which makes his kingdom stronger, right? Make less threats over them. Or maybe both. It's each of them. He literally thinks it's better, and it's also going to keep his rule safer. Buddhism obviously turns on the idea of the caste system, and so as Buddhism spreads out of India, there is no notion of the caste system that will spread with it. So when Buddhism makes it into China or Southeast Asia, the caste system doesn't go because Buddhism doesn't accept that. Coolio? Coolio. Let's move on. Confucius. Now we're going to China. Confucius. One note about Confucius' name. That is not a Chinese name. In Chinese, he would be known as Kung Fu Zi. But in the Western world, you will more often see Confucius. Where do you think this name comes from? What's that kind of look like? What language would that be? Not English. I heard it, Latin. So this would be the language of the Roman Empire. The first guys in the West that were writing about Confucius were Romans. So they gave Confucius a Roman name, all right? Confucius, not a god. Never purported to be a god. Not a prophet. No connection whatsoever to any spiritual entity. Some Confucius believers later in Chinese history will kind of make him out to be like a godlike figure, but not at the start. Confucius was just a guy in China living during a chaotic time period that saw a better way to lead a Chinese state. He had ideas for creating a better state. Confucius lived during what was called the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou. It kind of looks like Zhao, but it's Zhou. The Zhou dynasty. He lived during the 6th century BCE. Oh my goodness. Siddhartha Gautama and Confucius, they're living at the same time. What word could we use for two people living at the same time period in history? They're contemporaries of each other. They're living at the same time. They didn't know each other. They had no clue each other existed, but they lived at the same time. Confucius lived during a time period in Chinese history where the Zhou dynasty was having a hard time maintaining its rule. So all Confucius was a guy that looked at the world or looked at his state and said, I think we can do it better. Here's how we should do it better. And he had followers. And they eventually wrote his ideas down into a collection of writings known as the Analects. The Analects of Confucius. So his students, his followers, wrote down his ideas, put them in the Analects. We'll look at some in a couple days. Put them in the Analects, and that was it. Yes, sir? The Golden Rule? I don't know about that. Did you come across that? I must have missed that in your book. Okay. Is this the do unto others? Like that goal? Yeah. So that idea exists not only obviously in Chinese ideology, but really every religion kind of adopts that idea or something like it. So for Confucianism, it supports traditional Chinese ideas. We will talk more about this next week, but I want to talk a little bit about how the Chinese state is set up and how they believe history works. I'm going to draw a little up and down cycle here. This is what we can do. We can see as a graphical representation of what in China we call the dynastic cycle. In Chinese history, a couple thousand years of Chinese history, the belief exists that good times will always be followed by bad times. And that bad times will always be followed by good times. And good times and bad times and good times and bad times. And it's going to go up and down throughout the extent of Chinese history. This is very different from our Western belief, right? American ideology says what follows good times? More good times, better times, right? And what follows those better times? Even better, like this ever-present march upward. We're having a weird handling of that right now, though, because you guys are a part of this first generation of American history that won't be as successful as your parents, it seems. Now, individuals, you might do it as individuals, but as a whole, we're going to have a hard time doing what our parents did. Or you guys did, at least. I'm like your parents. Goodness gracious. Anyway, this dynastic cycle means good times, right? You got a dynasty in power. It's doing the right thing. It's keeping outsiders out. It's keeping the people that live in your country happy. And then something starts to change. Leaders become corrupt. You're not taking care of the storehouses. Bad weather leading to droughts and famines. Maybe outsiders come and invade. And your dynasty is toppled. And then new rulers come in. And they do the right thing. And they do better. And then they fall apart again. And then they do the right thing and they do better, and then they fall apart again. Part of what dictates this rise and this fall in Chinese beliefs is known as the mandate of heaven. The gods are on your side. The mandate of heaven. If you have the mandate of heaven, if the gods want you to rule, guess what? You will rule. And they want you to rule, according to Confucius, when you're doing the right thing, when you're being a good and benevolent ruler. And then when you stop doing that, the gods will take away their mandate of heaven. And what happens when they take away the mandate of heaven? You fall. And you're replaced by someone else who will then have the mandate of heaven. Confucius just built on these ideas that are already there. And he developed a way of thinking that will shape how we can make sure we will be ruled well and society will be in order. These are known as the 5 relationships of Confucius. You need to know these 5 relationships. Ruler to ruled, or ruler to subject. Father to son. Husband to wife. Elder brother to younger brother. And then the one relationship where the two parties are equals. Friend to friend. In every one of these, you have someone who is dominant and someone who must follow and is submissive. Dominant, submissive, down the line, except for friend to friend. But in every one of these, the ruler has obligations. He must be a good ruler. He must be a fair father. He must be a good husband. He must be a wise elder brother. The subject must follow the leader. The son must respect his father. The wife must listen to her husband. Okay, it is a patriarchal society, okay? And this is going to be like the most patriarchal society we'll talk about. The younger brother should follow the lead of the elder brother. Friends should be trustworthy with each other. If all of these relationships are met, if the obligations of each relationship are met, what will happen to Chinese society? It will be peaceful. It will be harmonious. It will be better kept in order, right? Note, AP World loves you guys making connections and finding similarities between cultures. When I talk about obligations for each of these positions in the relationships, what does that make you think of? I want to go back to the back. Yeah, go ahead. Hinduism and the dharma, right? The obligations that one must meet within their caste and to bring more order to society. So very similar there, even though we're talking about, obviously, two religions or two belief systems, very different. So in Confucianism, there's an emphasis on hierarchy, on like ranking in society. And if each of these relationships are followed, according to Confucius' teachings, society will be kept in better order. Yes, ma'am?
Did anybody go against?
Sure. There's crappy dads. There's crappy rulers. There's crappy husbands. There's crappy kids. Do we have any crappy kids in this class? There's like 4 of them. Okay. So there are always people that don't follow them. But what happens to a husband and wife if the husband is crappy or if the wife doesn't listen to her husband? Well, not society, but the family will be broken. What happens to a father-son relationship if the father doesn't meet his duties or if the son is disobedient? The family relationship is broken. What happens to the state if the ruler is self-serving and greedy and doesn't meet the needs of his people? Or if the people don't follow the ruler? The society is broken and then they lose the mandate of heaven. Yes?
So what are these 5 things called?
These are the 5 relationships of Confucius. Please note, ruler to ruled, father to son, elder brother to younger brother, friend to friend. The only specific mention of a woman is in the relationship of husband to wife. All right? This is a strictly patriarchal society. This is important, though, because in the 2nd century before the Common Era, the Han Dynasty in China, we'll talk about them next week, will adopt Confucianism as their idea set for setting up their government. And it will, for the next 20 years, next 2,000 years, dictate Chinese life and culture. All right? Questions, comments on that? Yes, ma'am?
Can we go back to the mandate of heaven?
Yeah. You want me to just go back there and talk a little bit more about it? Okay. If something is mandatory, what is it? It's necessary. You have to do it. If it's mandatory that you do this, you must take care of this. The mandate of heaven is the gods, whatever, the gods in China, giving the right to rule to a family. But it's not just you get to rule so you get opulence and you get all the riches of society. You have an obligation. You have to rule. You have to rule well. And so if you do rule well, you will maintain the mandate of heaven. The gods will let you continue to rule. But if you start to rule poorly, the gods will pull that away. And when they've pulled that mandate of heaven away, outsiders now can get into your empire. Floods can now ravage your countryside. Droughts can now starve your people, right? Famines can starve your people. And your dynasty will fall. Someone else will take your place. And then they rule. They have the mandate of heaven. And they keep it for as long as they can keep it. All right? We will see some dynasties in Chinese history that last for centuries. We'll see some that last for a couple decades. So you can lose that mandate pretty quickly. It's just a way to explain how Chinese society evolves. All right, one other quick note about another Chinese religion. It says Taoism. You guys have all seen this symbol before, right? What is that? It's the yin-yang symbol, right? Notice the idea of the yin-yang symbol is that it is perfectly in balance with itself, right? There is no more white than there is black, and it shares like equal space within this design. Taoism is founded by a Chinese man in the 6th century BCE. Whoa! The 6th century BCE was a really big time for monumental ideas to be born, right? His name was Lao Tzu. Laozi, or Lao Tzu, Laozu. Same thing, Lao Tzu. It's a reality of Chinese coming into the English language. It's called transliteration. Sometimes we see slightly different ways to write the same names. But Lao Tzu kind of looks alike, same guy. And he creates the ideas that become Taoism. He wrote a book called the Tao Te Ching. If you've ever heard of that, you can still buy it at bookstores today. And it lays out the ideas of a Taoist belief. The Taoists in China, they are more of like a nature and balanced-based belief system. Not so much a God religion where a God is worshipped, but one tries to be in harmony with themselves and with the nature or natural world around them. Taoists separate from the political world. So whereas Confucianists were all about trying to make a better political state, Taoists just want it out. We've long in AP World kind of talked about the Taoists of ancient China as like the hippies of the 1960s, disconnecting from the political system in the United States and just kind of doing their own thing and becoming one with nature. Confucianism and Taoism will be born in China and will spread to other Asian areas like Korea and Southeast Asia. Which of the two, though, do you think would be more important in terms of political development in China? Taoism or Confucianism? Absolutely Confucianism. Though we will have, throughout Chinese history, we'll talk about a couple rebellions and uprisings by Taoists who felt persecuted by the government in China. So this name will come up again, but not much to mention about Taoism today. Christianity. Like Buddhism, Christianity can be considered a universalist religion. A universal religion. It could be for anybody. And to this day, there are Christians in South America. There's Christians in North America and in Africa and in Europe, obviously, and in Asia and in Australia. And there are Christian researchers now living in Antarctica. So Christianity can go anywhere. It knows no racial bounds or ethnic bounds. Everybody is welcome. Christianity is born, obviously, in the 1st century of the Common Era. Remember, even if we change BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, to before the Common Era and the Common Era, the line between those is still the birth of Jesus. So everybody around the world that uses the modern Western calendar is basing that calendar on, whether they're Christian or not, it's basing it on when Jesus was born. So it was born around the 1st century CE, in a region of the Roman Empire called Judea. This is primarily a Jewish region of the Roman Empire. Jesus was Jewish, born to Jewish parents, lived his life as a Jewish boy. And when he taught and brought people into his following, his followers largely were Jews in the area, in the community, that believed he was this Messiah that was prophesied in the Old Testament to come back to earth. Of course, Jesus was executed by the Romans. We talked about this the other day. Because many of the Jewish priests in Judea thought Jesus was pulling their followers away. So, in order to keep the peace, the Romans executed Jesus. But his followers, just like Confucius' followers, his followers spread his ideas and continued to talk and teach, right? The Gospels that Christians are familiar with, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? What are these? These are the written stories of Jesus' life by the followers of Jesus, right? And so those ideas, those stories will spread. And where will they spread? All throughout the Roman Empire. Wherever the Roman Empire went, the Christian religion will spread. One note, and we will talk about this next week. If you are, Caitlin, do you ever have dreams of creating an empire? Awesome. Wouldn't that be great? One of the first things you want to do after you create your empire is build a lot of really good roads. Roads are essential in an empire. Roads are essential to us. Guys, we've lived for much of the last 2 or 3 years with Hall Road, Macomb County's most important thoroughfare, absolutely destroyed and riddled by potholes. It was a mess. Felt like my car would fall apart going across it. Now they've been rebuilding it, and it's wonderful. And when there are effective roads, you can better do business. You can better travel. Your military can better make it from point A to point B to defend your borders. Roads are hugely important. So merchants and soldiers travel on roads. But so do missionaries. So do people trying to spread ideas and religions. So Christianity will slowly spread through the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century throughout Rome. Because there's roads for these dudes to walk on. And more Christians will be born. Christianity is in many ways similar to Buddhism. Who did Buddhism most appeal to? Wealthy or the poor in society? The poorer in society. Because it gave them more hope today. Christianity appeals to the poorer in society. Because who's going to inherit the earth in Christian ideology? Yeah, the meek, but the poor. You guys heard the phrase, meek shall inherit the earth, right? It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. This is a Christian idea. It glorifies the poor. It lets the poor know that in heaven you will be taken care of. And if you're poor, that sounds pretty good to you, right? Wait a minute. I could live this lousy life right now, but then have eternity in heaven next to God? That sounds pretty sweet. So more and more Christians over time will be born, or more and more people will convert to Christianity because it's appealing in its universal ideas. It's for anybody, not just an elite few. In the 4th century of the Common Era, one Roman emperor, a man named Constantine, will allow Christianity to exist within the Roman Empire without persecution. He will sign what's called the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan, which allows or ends the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. Now there will be tolerance of Christians. And then later, Constantine himself will actually convert to Christianity. You guys ever hear the phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans? What will many Romans do now that the emperor has converted to Christianity? They will become Christians themselves. So after Constantine's conversion to Christianity, much of the Roman Empire will convert. So you see the little red, that's Christian areas by 325. So pockets around the Roman Empire. And then by 500, we see it spreading throughout the Roman Empire. By the year 1000, virtually all of Europe will be Christianized. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes?
Can you repeat what you said before, the part when Constantine converts to Christianity?
I don't know what was the beginning. The Edict of Milan, that part? He signs the Edict of Milan, which is an order from the emperor to say, hey, stop messing with Christians. We won't persecute Christians anymore. We tolerate Christians. So Christians are now tolerated, so their population will grow because people don't have to be afraid about practicing anymore. All right? Because it's a new faith. We will talk much more about Christianity as the year goes on. Christianity is going to go through some changes. We're going to have a split between my Roman Catholic Christians and my Eastern Orthodox Christians. Do I have any Christians in here that are a member of an Eastern Orthodox church? Okay, so we'll get some help from you guys later. And then in the 1500s, on Halloween Day in 1517, Martin Luther officially started the breakup of the Roman Catholic Church in Western Europe, creating a Lutheran church, and then many other Christian branches broke up from there. So we'll talk much more about Christianity as the year goes on. For now, we're good to go. We have a new religion. It's a universal religion, and it brings in many followers. Cool? All right. I'm going to backtrack a little bit time-wise. In Greece and in Rome, before and during the early years of Christianity, they had religious beliefs as well. Not going to spend a lot of time on it. In fact, we spend most time, what kind of class in school tends to spend the most time talking about Greek religion? Yes?
Literature.
Yeah, in like a literature class. You read like the epics of Homer, or you read, I think in here, don't you guys read Oedipus at some point? Maybe? The Iliad? Okay. All of these stories of Greek literature. You might read Percy Jackson. Anybody big Percy Jackson fans? All right. So all of these stories of the gods of ancient Greece or of ancient Rome, they're interesting. They tell us a little bit about the culture of the day. They tell us a little bit about the personalities of the day. But they never really were overarching religious beliefs that certainly didn't spread beyond their birthplace. Today, just like some people practice Christianity more seriously than others, during this time period, some followed the gods in Greece or the gods in Rome more seriously than others. Most people in ancient Rome or in Greece, their mythological stories, their stories about the gods were just that. They were stories that people would tell. They might shape morality, but they weren't really a serious religious belief for most in ancient Greece or in ancient Rome. For some they were, but for most they really weren't. This is call it a pantheon. That means all the gods. So this is a polytheistic religion where there's a god of the sea and a god of all and a god of love and a god of war and goddesses of all those things as well. And they messed with humanity, right? And they tinkered around, and they sometimes, if you were a person that didn't do the right thing, if you, challenged Athena's beauty, I'm going to give you snakes for hair and make guys that look at you turn to stone, because that's what we can do as gods. Most Greeks and Romans just took these as stories, more than a serious religion that was followed. Yes?
Was there a large patriarch as well in Greece? If they were goddesses, then were women and men still different?
There certainly was. It was a patriarchy, but